Say how grateful I am, I'm speaking for my wife Diana as well, to have been invited here. It's been a fantastic experience, and I want to thank George, and I want to thank Eleni, and Christina, and Marjorie. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here, and I've really loved meeting the filmmakers and speaking with you about your projects, and it inspires me, it really does. And I wish you all the best. And when I was asked to come here by Marjorie, I was kind of wondering, well, this is a script development thing, that's not really, I'm involved in some end of that, but I'm really a director, and she said, no, come. So I came up with this topic, the collaborative art, speaking as a director, what how I work with a director and how it's a collaborative experience with writers, but I'm gonna make this a case of form matching content and turn this whole talk into a collaboration. So I'm gonna talk a little bit, but I'm really gonna wanna hear from you guys what would be of interest for you to hear and discuss. So I'll make a few introductory remarks and talk about a few things, but I want you to be, if you have questions or topics you'd like me to address, we'll have plenty of time. Hopefully most of the time will be there, since it's not a lot of blah blah from me only. And I was a little mixed on whether to start with something, in the States, maybe here anyway, directors have to make a reel of their work, clips and things like that to show to prospective employers. So it's a little glitzy, but I just thought I'd play it just as an introduction for some of the stuff I've worked on. So just to kind of get started, so I'm gonna play a clip, okay?
Together, but the whole world sort of capture the idea that everything we know is just barely being held together.
I think that's truth. Help! Help me!
Oh, Ma, you gotta stop with this black poison cloud all the time, because I can't take it anymore.
Oh, poor you.
You will die trying, or worse, and I won't allow it.
It's taken me a while to start feeling things again. It's the most natural thing in the world, right? Feeling things.
It's your age and you're supposed to get. I love it. You suck it, motherfucker.
So I've worked on a lot of different kinds of shows, and I've collaborated with a lot of, the topic doesn't really have to say about collaboration, but, and spoiler alert, you guys already understand this, it's very clear just from sitting in your workshops, how collaborative a process that is, and how you get enriched by the process. If you stay open, if people are coming with a good intention and wanting to help and wanting to make something beautiful and good, then we benefit from input. So that I've seen this sitting in your sessions, how problems. We all benefit from multiple perspectives. I really like something actually. Gabor, you here? Yeah, he said something I thought was really relevant, and I've certainly noticed in my work. He said how in the writer's room, you have problems to solve, and it's important to be able to say any idea, even if they're bad ideas, because the bad idea may lead to the good idea. And I've noticed that in writers' rooms on various shows, when you have showrunners who are dictatorial and judgmental and cynical, it really leads to a very unhealthy kind of thing, because you really need freedom to just say anything. And that's kind of, somehow the process can work so that, what emerges is something of value. So I think we all kind of understand that who are here, but I'm just gonna kind of shoot from the hip here, see what kind of comes up. But in terms of the writer and the director collaborating, it's very, we all have our roles and we all bring different strengths. The writer, I have so much, first of all, appreciation for what you all do, because you're dreaming something out of thin air. I mean, you're kind of coming up with the original idea. I thought when I started out I would be a writer-director, but I realized I'm terrible at the blank page, all the demons come in. That's not good. So those of you who can actually stay with ideas and let them come through you, I stand in awe of. And and it's so much easier to stand and take shots at something. That's no good. That's good, So that you can stay with it in the process of germinating an idea, something, nothing would happen without it. But then you have another, it's interesting. When you write, it's all in your imagination. You can write whatever you want. You can, and you should write whatever you want, certainly for the first draft or two, because, stop, say, well, we can't do that. That's too expensive to produce. It's better, my experience is, this is true of directing as well. When I approach a project, I try not to limit myself when I first think about how I might want to shoot something, to say, well, that would take too long to shoot, we won't have time, I can't get a crane because that would be an extra 2 hours. I try not to do that. I try to first approach it like dream what my best version of this might be. And the same is true, I hope, for you all as writers. You don't limit yourself, you let whatever idea comes. But then you emerge with something, and it has to be made real, or not exactly real, but it has to be photographed with real actors and real places and all that. And then the director comes in and is dealing not just in the imagination. It has to be imagination. I have to, as director, maintain the vision of the story. And kind of spoiler alert, to me everything is about story and storytelling. That to me is what should motivate. That's what motivates me. Now I also appreciate that other people work differently. For myself, I can't do anything until I know the story. I can't think of a shot until I know what story I want to tell. There are other directors who are so visual. They start with an image, and the image is what feeds them, and that's wonderful. It's not how I work, but it's we all have our unique ways of interacting with reality. So the director, and you may have written something, you may have heard something in your head about, for example, how a certain line is said. But then you deal with real people who are acting the part, and they may say it differently than what the writer heard or how. Now, I, as the director, will also have heard this in my imagination too, because I understand the story and I understand what I think is being conveyed by the line, but I have to be careful not to enforce someone to do it exactly the way I want until I hear what they bring to it, because they may have something better. They may have a different interpretation that I never thought of. If I too quickly want someone to just, if I stop the collaboration too quickly, then I'm limited. It's funny. I'm going to jump around a bit, but I was talking here to someone earlier about this line that I guess may have been attributed originally to Hitchcock or someone, but that there are 3 movies, or Truffaut maybe. There are 3 movies: the one that's written, the one that gets shot, and the one that's gone through the post-production thing, that they all change and they all get transformed based on a lot of people's hands touching it and contributing to it. So let me go back to this point of story and another that I've noticed in the workshops. I'm glad to see that the instructors and you guys are all focusing on that and really what story do you want to tell, because that's another thing that motivates me as a director. I have to not just know what story I'm telling, but I have to care deeply about what story I'm telling. So if I don't care about it, I'm not going to make anybody else care about it. And that's, I notice a lot of the instructors are asking you all to really think, why are you telling this story? Why do you want to tell this story? And that's such an important question to answer. But until I can connect to the material in a way that I started out, my entry into the business was not as a director, it was as an actor. And I wasn't very good. And I came late to that even. I first was going to go to law school after I graduated with an English degree, and I didn't want to do that. And I started taking acting classes, really at first to just kind of free myself up. And then I fell in love with this. I thought, this is marvelous. I'm discovering new things coming through me. But I had a lot of emotional constraints about, like I understood pretty well where I wanted the scene to go, but to really change one's insides to do it, you have to, really work through a lot of your own personal issues, which at that time I was not doing very well. So it was always difficult. It turned out, I should say, just parenthetically, that was the best training I ever had as a director, because I had to work so hard at motivating myself to get to an emotional state that now that I know a lot of ways to do it, because I needed to myself. So when I work with actors who have more of an open channel, I'm pretty adept at being able to help them get there, because I've thought of a few things. But I took an acting workshop from a very famous, legendary American acting teacher named Stella Adler. One of her most famous pupils was Marlon Brando. And she said something that has always stuck with me, and I think it's a good thing to keep in mind, which is she would tell actors, and I think this is true of writers, and it's certainly been true for me as a director, that make your stories, your conflicts about something big. She had a famous break. I don't know how many of you know about the Actors Studio and Lee Strasberg, and really, find it in your personal experience. She had a famous break from them because one of the reasons was there was an emphasis always on being natural. And I remember her saying in these workshops, she says, I don't care so much if you're natural. If you get up on stage and slouch around and smoke a cigarette and pick your nose and spit, that's natural, but I don't really care about that. I want to care, and she extended the thought to say, when you are breaking down a scene where something happens, try to figure out a motivation that has a universal application, that's a bigger issue than just, you can justify an action by an infinite number of ways. Like if you're writing a story about coming to the MFI conference here, and your protagonist is coming here to write a screenplay or to work on a screenplay, there's all kinds of reasons. It could be someone here who wants to meet a girl or a boy. It could be someone here who wants to just kind of have a career in this fun business. There could be someone who, there are all kinds of reasons that are legitimate, and characters within your story might well have that. But for your lead, that doesn't seem to me a terribly interesting motivation. If the motivation, that's your job as my job as a director, but even your job when you're conceiving the projects. It's like, what if the motivation is to make something beautiful for posterity, or to break through some inner constraint that limits the way you experience life? Suddenly you've got a character who's got bigger plans, bigger interests, and the lines of dialogue don't necessarily need to change, but suddenly, the audience will follow this character more than they would about if the only thing you're telling the actor to think about is something superficial. So I'm always trying to find something I can care deeply about. And so in my work, the shows I do, I generally have very little time to prepare them. In episodic television, unlike features, and then one of the reasons I like episodic television, unlike features, is you're not stuck developing something for years and years. You have, in my case, only about a week and a half to prepare, a complicated episode, and then you might have, 8 to 10 days to photograph it. So you really hit the ground running. I may not even see the script until the night before I go in to start those 7 days to prepare it. And then within that time, a lot of things have to happen. You have to pick your locations, you have to cast the parts for the non-permanent speaking roles, the show has to be scheduled, you have to figure out how you're going to shoot things, if you need to order special equipment, if you're going to do crane shots or drone shots or things that require, being ordered. You have to do all these things. So there's not a great deal of time. And also, the writers have already moved on to the next episode to be worried about. They'll work with you a little bit to make adjustments, but they're not going to, throw out the script. And, so you can't, argue for that. But you have to figure out a way to relate to the material, and for me, what that involves is doing everything I can to understand the intentions of the writer. I'll read the script first, and I'll form my own impressions. And my wife laughs usually because almost every time I get a script on a show, I'm really eager. Oh, I'm going to get to direct The Americans, or I'm going to get to direct Homeland. This is so exciting. And I'll read the script, and the first thing I do is I think, oh, I got the worst one. It's not going to work. And I'm depressed and I'm pissed off. And then I start, digging in and saying, okay, well, what's really maybe going on here? And then early on in the prep, am I going too fast? But I'm just going to. Okay. During the prep, there's something we call the tone meeting, which is you get to sit with the showrunner and the writer of the episode also. And it's my opportunity as a director to really hear ask any question I have about it, but go through scene by scene to really understand, now, why is this scene here? I know it's about this, but, what is really the intention here? Where do you see the shift is in this scene? It reads like a fight, but it might be a seduction. Is that right or not? Yes, it is that. I mean, if you want to learn what really is going on, because the best writing, in my view, and I think most of you would see the sense of this, is subtextual writing. The best writing is not write the subtext of the scene, because that's not how life works. We don't speak our subtext. Those are soap operas. It's like when someone just reveals their whole character in dialogue. That's not how real human beings work. We all have agendas, and we have, we all pretty much feel, alienated in certain ways, and we have to, couch what we really want in something else, and it's oblique. And so often it's not apparent, what a scene is about, until you can really, dig deep into it. This also has given me tools at times to actually change the sense of the scene by changing the subtext. And maybe that's a case of when I find something that might interest me, what to make a story about. If I don't get agreement necessarily, or even if I do, it's like, it's always more interesting to me anyway when I can figure out a way to help actors play an intention that is not the obvious one, and then it can open up, all kinds of things. But, I'll find out from the writers, what's the story they wanted to tell. And then my job becomes, then I can understand the script a little bit. Oh, now I see why there's this, that, and the other. If you really want to tell that story, it feels to me like there's a beat missing here. Wouldn't it be more sense if we want to understand this, for example, wouldn't we need another moment? And then maybe they have a chance to say, okay, yeah, we can add a beat there. But this is my collaboration with them. This is my being charged with the responsibility of telling the story. I now have a different point of view that maybe than the writers had. They said, oh, the director will figure it out. Maybe, we don't know exactly how this works, but, he'll shoot it in an interesting way and get past this problem. Well, sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't. Sometimes I'm always aware of the audience and where the audience is at any particular moment. So that like in your classes today and yesterday, it's like I'm always listening to what you're saying I'm listening, what am I following or what am I caring about right now? Because that's what I have to worry about as a director. It's like I can't think, well, I'm writing a paper and there's a lot of reasons that are coming out here that make me understand. What is the audience feeling? Do I still have the audience's interest? I sometimes think of storytelling in an episode as if I've shared this with a couple of you, but it's like if I'm holding a string that you can pull, either make it very taut and tight or just loosen it a little bit and then tighten it. That's kind of what I'm doing. I feel like in telling the story, there's moments of rest, but you never drop the string. If you drop the string, you've lost everybody. You're telling something, you're weaving something all the way through. And if there's a scene, for example, where nothing is happening, and the audience doesn't know why they're watching it, or at least are not intrigued to discover the answer why they're watching it, they lose interest. If it's just a boring scene, and that's devastating because you've lost their attention and you've got to somehow get it back. And until you get it back, they're not really on board with you for everything that proceeded from that point up to then. So I'm aware of those things as I think, as I approach each moment, and it's my job to make sense of the whole story and why each moment is there. And then I can talk to the writers and say, I could use help here. I think this beat is repetitive. I don't see why this beat is different from that one that happened, 3 scenes earlier. And maybe they'll tell me why. It's okay, good. That gives me something to work on. But that's the story I have to tell for that scene. Then I don't want to tell the same story, or I can say, we don't have enough time to shoot this episode anyway, maybe this is a candidate to cut. Or I can see what the essential story is, because shows are often overwritten in terms of how much time you have to do in television as opposed to features. So I have to appreciate, as the writers do too, but they may not be holding this so much in mind. I have to prioritize. Okay, so we can do all of this badly because we don't have enough time, or if we're going to do it well and tell the story in the time we have to tell it, what's the most important element? What can we maybe sacrifice, and what can we maybe cut? These are all things that, So as I hear myself go through all this, I hope I'm conveying to you that how collaborative a process this is. So it's exactly the same process I'm watching you all going through now. It doesn't stop. You get to the point, it's not in 6 months, I hope you guys will all have just perfect scripts and all that, but it ain't over then. Nothing's happened except you now have the thing to go forward hopefully into production with. And that, frankly, is just a skeleton, because it's not fleshed out and made real until it's in production and things are being made and other things kind of come up. And then this whole issue of what happens then. Let's extend this theme of collaboration. To me, the people I most enjoy. People I most enjoy working with in any department are those who are storytellers themselves. And I think anybody who works in film, and if you get a chance, you may not get a chance to start right away as a writer, but no matter where you start, whether you're a wardrobe assistant or whatever it might be, everything has to serve story, and story should inform every choice. So, when I work with it's very exciting to me if I work with a prop person who comes up and says, I think I'd like to really have wine on the table in this scene. I mean, so-and-so is an alcoholic, and he's on the wagon, and he's losing it a little bit in the scene. It might be interesting to add something that might be, that's really interesting. Or how might this, what kind of a prop might this character hold, or in wardrobe? It's like, you don't want to just make everybody look beautiful because you're a wardrobe person. You can do fabulous outfits. What if your character is depressed and would never go out in bright colors? Thinking about always where you're telling the story by whatever you can contribute, and that is the nature of this thing we get to do. It's such a communal activity. It's fantastic. Directing I love because I get to be the final arbiter on a lot of things. I do, get to decide, at least on the set, what stays there and what doesn't, or what performance is what I want, when I'm ready to move on or not. But I love being open to people's ideas and to input. And I can't tell you how many times I've had great ideas come from, not from me. Maybe I'll show you a clip, since I want to do that a little bit. And we're looking at Jim Gandolfini. I'll show you a clip, I think from The Sopranos, and for a couple of reasons. This is an episode I'm thinking about, 4th season. And it's an example, I think, of great writing, which is very spare writing. The dialogue is very simple. The whole story is a subtext. So I think it's great for that reason. And then it also is a great example, I think, about how staging, something the writers had no idea about. This is something like a director can bring, or actors can bring, once they understand what the story is, how staging can also greatly enhance the whole experience and actually advance the story in ways that maybe you haven't thought of as a writer. And lastly, it's a great example of my brilliance at letting an actor have his own way, at being able to receive a great idea that Jim Gandolfini had when we were approaching the scene. I don't even remember the staging I had in mind, but as soon as he came up with this idea, I immediately, this is brilliant. And so the scene, it's the end of an episode, season 4, where it's been a marital strife episode. Carmela knows Tony screws around. She's fed up with it. He's sworn, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. But he does. And he does with a woman who has very long fingernails. And the way Carmela discovers this is she's doing the laundry. She's emptying out his pants and all that to throw in the laundry. And among his keys is this glittered fingernail, and she sees that son of a bitch has been lying to me. All right, so the way she knows to get back at Tony is to hit him where it hurts, which is she's going to go out into the backyard, into the bird feeder where Tony keeps money buried under the bird seed, and she goes out, she takes $40,000, and she goes and deposits it in her own bank account, each bank account for $9,999, so it doesn't have to be reported to the IRS. And in this scene, I think I'll show you, I think the clip may start when Tony goes out to see to the bird feeder, and he sees that some money is gone. And then he goes up to his room and he sees that his keys and everything are arranged nicely, and right there and prominently placed for him to see is the fingernail. So Carmela is, without saying anything more, is conveying to him. And Tony comes downstairs, and there is Carmela, cool as a cucumber, with a morning coffee, reading the paper. And she would like nothing more than for Tony to say, did you take that $40,000? And for her to be able to just, she's, what do yeah, do you have anything to tell me? Maybe you did, and it's like, so she's ready to just kill him. But she needs him to kind of raise the question. And I don't remember how I generally will have a staging in mind, but I don't impose it until we rehearse it. But what Jim did was, and the dialogue is virtually nothing. It's just like, she's there, she looks at him, he comes down, she says, hi, Tom, And as I recall, it's something like, you want a cup of coffee? He said, no. And he says, yeah, okay. You have decaf? She says, yeah, I can make some decaf. And she goes to make some decaf. And then AJ, the son, comes in, and he says something like, Tony says to AJ, he says, you and your friends been up by the pool? And AJ says, what? No, it's winter, I'm gonna be at the pool. You sure nobody's been out by the pool? He says, and then the kid says, this is nuts, my parents are, I'm out of here. He says, I'm leaving. He walks out. And there may be a couple other lines, you'll see in a minute. And then Carmela says, "You okay, Tom?" And he's, "Yeah, why shouldn't I be okay?" You know, and she says, "You sure?" And he says, "Yeah, what?" I mean, that's basically the dialogue, that's it. And, and the sense of the scene, the story of the scene is like, these are two formidable adversaries. And Tony has made a decision, which you'll see in the blog, he's going to live to fight another day. He's not going to fight this fight because he's been had, he's been revealed. And if he chooses to answer her, she'll nail him to the cross. So his thing is, okay, I can live without the $40,000. It's an expensive lesson, but I'm not going to engage in this thing. So Jim had an idea when we started rehearsing it, and I'll play this thing and you'll see how he chose to do it and go from there. Well, let's have some fun. I'll play it in 3 sequences. So. So this is Carmela discovering what's happening. I don't think there is any. Yeah, it's just not. Yeah. Okay. Now can you play the next one? Oh yeah, why not? So now she's, this is a little more than I thought we'd play, but now she's stewing about what to do. She looks out and she'll see, she knows where Tony hides his money. More than we probably need to play, but. Now let's play.
Decaf?
Decaf?
Nah, forget it. Regular's fine.
I can make decaf.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
He didn't want to be anywhere near her. As soon as she moved, he wanted to get away from her. He goes to the other end of the set.
Something wrong, Tony?
Why? You were in the backyard the last couple of days.
Me? It's freezing out there.
You sure? The pool guy come around?
I wouldn't.
Check up on stuff? Something?
Alright, I'm going upstairs.
Only take a minute. You sure, Tom? It's not something you want to talk about?
No. Like what?
So that's, and I just love, on the stage he told the whole story. It's like, I'm not coming close to this woman. It's like she's holding the cards right now. I'm going to accept this defeat and not give her a chance to come back at me. And when Jim, had this impulse, you normally, and those of you who direct, it's like you try to frame shots, and it's a little worrisome. Whoa, you're gonna get all the way. I can't hold a 2-shot. I can't, But that became what the story was about. Him wanting to have this distance. So that was a nice bit of collaboration. I'm kind of tempted. Well, maybe I'll do a couple more examples and then just open it up to questions. How are we for time? Yeah. Let me just share a few ways in which directors can enhance the storytelling that you guys write. And it's like, it's great for you. One thing I would hope for you is that you be thinking visually as you write as well, so that you don't necessarily think all of the action has to be through dialogue. That you can, it's helpful. When I get a script, it's, when I sense that the writer does give room for me to tell something visually. That writing obviously was an example of fantastic subtext. Then it depends on making sure that the director understands what that subtext is, but that's my job. But there are a lot of other tools I have as a director to tell the story. One of the big ones is point of view. It's like, which is what I often tell directors, that's something they should always hold in mind, because if you're telling a story, the point of view is critical. Who is the story for? Who is it? Who is going through the story? Who is the protagonist? And you want to understand that. You want to cue the audience visually. Sometimes you'll get directors who just think, I'll just cover every angle, every actor from every angle, whatever size, and they'll just figure it out in the editing room. Well, that's a very inefficient way to work, and also a very unartful way to work, because when people work that way, they often don't get the one shot they needed, because they haven't known what the story really is. So point of view, I'll show a story from a shot from there, a scene that will illustrate that. There was something else I thought I might. Well, let me show you a couple of examples how point of view can really assist in the storytelling. Are many of you familiar with the show The Killing? Yeah. Well, at the end of season 3, the last episode of the season, Mireille, I forget the character's name, Mireille's Lyndon, discovers that her lover is actually the serial killer she's been tracking for years. And she understands this, and he's the police chief, her commanding officer. And she understands this when she sees that a key prop, a ring that was disappeared from one of the victims, is actually on the finger of this police captain's daughter. So obviously, before the body had been discovered by the police, he had seen the body and he had taken the ring and he had given it to his daughter. So in this moment, she understands everything. And she's also trapped. She's on the way out the door with him to leave together. This happens when they're coming down the stairs and the door opens and the policeman's wife has entered and is looking daggers at her because she says, "You're the woman who's taking my husband away," and the daughter is upset. And so I staged it to really pin Mireille that's Joel Kinnaman, Lyndon, to pin her against the steps, that she was really forced to watch this scene feeling very awkward. And this is another storytelling device. It's sometimes very effective to have a misdirection, to prepare the audience for maximum effect by suggesting the story is about something else at this moment. So it's a very rich moment where it looks like it's about your lead character's terrible guilt and discomfort about breaking up this family, and then it turns into something else. So that I think the audience is a lot more vulnerable and exposed and unprotected when they see, "Oh my God, this is the killer," so it goes in. And then she sees, on their way out to the car, how is she going to confront him? And I played with some time distortion and point of view in a way that I think enhances the effect. So let me play that. And can I get your help again, Ron?
Any word from Skinner? Is that back yet?
I wanted to remind the audience about this key prop. We'll see how that happens.
Hey, Jerry, it's me again. I need you to call me back right away. Holder's been taken by IA for questioning. I really need your help. Wait, call me, please.
So the ring behind her is on the evidence board. It's not in the scene, it's just I put it there so people would understand, but that have that in their mind so that they'd remember what it was. Now she's going to, this is edited together, now she's going to the policeman's home.
James? What are you doing?
Hey, what are you doing here?
Holder was taken by IA. I've been calling you. They won't let me see him. You've got to get him out.
I'll take care of it.
The traffic cam showed that there was a gray car stopped in between here and here.
Hit him with the car. Doesn't mean he's renting stuff, right?
So after all this, it really does come down to your career, your reputation.
So he's leaving because he's the killer, but we don't know that yet, and she doesn't know that yet. She's taking this to be his cowardice to face his department failing that he did. There you go.
This is nice.
Bethany.
Vinny, come on.
Wait a second. Wait.
Are you really leaving?
Just for a while. Just tell Mom and I work things out. Hey, I'm sorry. It's gonna be okay. I love you, darling. I love you so much. See you soon, okay?
If you want to see him alive, then come with me.
Hand over your weapon.
Where is it? Where is it? Put your hands behind your back.
If you arrest me now, you never see him again. He'll die out there alone.
Get in the car. Get in the car.
So what I love about that is how it's all conveyed visually, basically. I mean, a great deal is conveyed visually. It's like the understanding that he has, that she knows, all of it's done with books. And I think the reason it's effective is, you know, it was such an earth-shattering moment for her. So I tried to think, how could we create this special reality she was just thrown into? And the choice was, and part of it was in the writing too, was to juxtapose, to see the banality of evil, to see, oh my God, this normal seeming world, and here is this monster right here. So came up with, I had an image of the sprinkler, kind of a David Lynch reference, I guess, but it's like I thought that there's something just hypnotic about that. And a little boy, I think in the script, there might have mentioned a boy on a bicycle. But then I was looking for, okay, but how, and I wanted to be able to tie in her view so that she could be looking at him and then her view would come off, and I wanted one more element that was so juxtaposed against the sense of horror. And it's funny, we were, scouting it, and I was trying to come up with ideas, and I was asking everybody in the van, what do you think? What? And someone came up with the idea, I don't know, ice cream truck. And I thought, that's perfect. It's like another case of collaboration, being open, enlisting collaborators, not being so, insistent that everything come out of your head. And so that, I thought, was fantastic. We got this ice cream truck, and then I did a ramp to slow motion. A bit cliche, but I think it works. It's suddenly we're in a different reality. And I also played with, kind of broke the fourth wall so that when she's walking down the steps, she looks straight into the camera, which is something that's generally pretty unnerving. Usually people are looking just off to one side. So she was looking straight into the camera, which brought the audience, I thought, to a much more visceral place. He was looking straight into the camera. So all of that, I think, you could write something, but when you're open to other elements coming in besides just dialogue to tell the story, there's really some terrific possibilities. Before I open it up to questions, I thought I'd share another thing that I thought was interesting, and Gabor and Michelle, forgive me, I think I told you guys this in the first night, but it's like, so what do you do if so if I come to the tone meetings and I'm prepping the show and there's some scene that really doesn't seem to work for me, doesn't really belong, but the showrunners really need it there. Maybe they need it for another reason, to establish something for a future episode. I had that experience recently on The Americans, not this season, last season. And are you guys familiar with it? I don't think The Americans airs here. Have you seen it? Show of hands who know the show, have seen the show? Fair number. But anyway, it's about a Russian sleeper cell that works in the United States, and they have a handler. There are heroes, and the male, the husband, is having deep second thoughts about his whole purpose of living and committing atrocities in the name of some political ideal. And the wife, Carrie Russell, is still fully on board. So there's tensions in the marriage. And what's brilliant about the conception, this is just something for you guys to, just as an example of when you create a great premise, is they can't leave. They can't just break up because they're performing this role for the Soviet Union. They have to keep up the pretense of being a family, a happy family. So even though this terrible split is happening within the marriage, they have to keep up the appearance. It's just not an option to divorce or to separate. So that's the brilliance of that show, I think. It holds, terrible oppositions without resolution for an excruciatingly long period of time. And that's a lesson, too, that I think we all could benefit from. Don't rush to solve the problem. I mean, it's like in life we want to solve the problem, but if you can build in obstacles where the problem can't be solved, but the conflict still is there, then it's a challenge to your actors and directors to really be able to hold that tension. But it's so fascinating. Anyway, this particular episode, Frank Langella played a character who was the handler, the kind of go-between between our hero couple and the KGB back in Russia, and he has to leave. So he has a bunch of other characters that he also handles that we know nothing about. But there was a scene in this script that I was being given to direct, and it's funny, when I read it, I thought, this is a very odd scene. And when I got to the location, I came to New York, I live in Los Angeles, I flew in, I had my 7 days to prepare it, and some of the producers were pulling their hair out about it. They were saying, oh my God, this scene is just terrible. Joe and Joel, the writers, we can't, this will get cut, there's no question, it's a stupid scene. I mean, and I said, what's the scene? I read the scene. And I agreed, it's very confusing. And the scene was that the lead guy, Philip, played by Matthew Rhys, has a scene where he comes to meet a character we've never seen before. He's a Russian Orthodox priest. He comes in disguise to a hospital. We've never met the guy. Philip comes and says hi, and his job is to get information from this guy since Frank Langella's character is gone. We learn, we don't know that at the beginning, it's completely confusing. And the priest speaks 2 pages of gibberish dialogue about, Father so-and-so I think is really not such a good Russian because he did this, and I think he drinks a little too much, but it goes on, it's like, who cares, And Philip says, okay, thanks, Phil, I'll, got it, see you later. And the priest says something to the effect of, am I going to see you again? And Phil said, well, I really don't know. I mean, the Bureau may send someone else to take over. I don't know, but I got this information. He says, well, I'd really like to see you again. I mean, Frank Langella, he used to like to come to see me. And he says, that's very nice. I gotta go. He says, but it was important to him. It was important to him. And then he leaves, something like that. And it seemed like a pathetic scene. And so we went to the town meeting, and I said to the writers, I said, what is this about? And they gave me a theoretical answer. They said, well, it's very interesting to them that this is the way it worked in the 1980s. The Russians would only allow the Russian Orthodox priests to travel out of the country if they weren't spies for them. And so they get to, be religious, practice their religion only if they do this. And we think this is really interesting. So, okay, but why now? Why, the speech we didn't hear, why now? Why me? Why whatever that is? But, and he said, well, he's kind of lonely too. He doesn't really have any friends because this is something about the price of this kind of work. You can't talk to anybody. It's like, so he really misses Frank Langella. He became friends with him. He doesn't really have any friends. So he wants to be Matthew's friend. And I'm thinking, yeah, and I care about this, why, And then the real reason for the scene came in, which is, and the next episode, Philip is going to decide to have an official Russian wedding and really marry Carrie Russell, and because they only have a pretend marriage, they present, but now they're falling in love, and Philip wants to actually surprise her with a real wedding, which drove the other producers crazy because they were saying, this is a woman who hates religion, she's totally on board with the Soviet, this whole sequence is crazy, the whole thing should be, cut. But I saw, okay, so they need this guy for the next episode because Philip has to have someone he can recruit who can make it an official wedding and they can be marrying their Russian names. And we got to the set and we're rehearsing it, and I'm trying my hardest to give it the little subtext they gave me. And we're rehearsing, and it's just sitting there dead. And this is something, this is the worst thing in the world for me. I can't, it's like I can't abide that. I have to keep staying with something until it feels real and important and alive. And like I said, the thread doesn't just drop. And, we rehearsed it and they started to light it, but I just couldn't let it go. And I started to think, okay, so what always comes to your aid? What always comes to your aid is story. That can be the only thing. So let me go back to the story. Now they told me what they thought the story was. This is a story about, the abuses of the Russian government and how it kind of screwed over this poor priest, and he's without friends, and that's the story. And then we tell that story, and then the next episode we get to have him, a character, perform this thing we get to do. But now it goes to what story can I care about? That's their story. Now what story can I care about? Now I can't just make up a whole story out of thin air. It's like I'm still within the context of this greater story that the Americans is dealing with. But I started saying, what have they given me here? They've given me a spiritual man. They've given me a priest. And he's been kind of neutered and emasculated and all that, but that's what they've written as a kind of broken guy. What if he's not broken? What if the idea of being spiritual tweaked my interest because suddenly I made a connection. Well, Philip is developing a spiritual sense. Even though it's against all of his training and all of his background, we've seen him over several episodes start to feel there's something wrong with this system. So he has a spiritual yearning also, which the show has established. So I started to think, okay, so the bigger story is that Philip is developing in ways that were unexpected. Then I started to think, this is all has to be very quickly because they're going to be ready to call the actors in 20 minutes, and I'm just thankful that this came to me. But then I started to think, so if this guy is a spiritual man, what if he really is performing his role? He's someone who has, in his congregation, he's a spiritual counselor to people. He sees into them. He is offering them a spiritual perspective to be helpful. That's what a priest does. And then I thought, okay, what else do we know about him? We know that he used to see Frank Langella. And we know from the dialogue that he's telling Philip, Frank Langella used to really like to come to see me. Now, the home meeting they had told me, well, that's just his pathetic little way of saying, he was my friend, would you be my friend? That was their view of it. That didn't really interest me, and I don't think it would interest any of you. And certainly wouldn't justify 2 minutes of territory in your story. But then I started to think, well, what if the story is about the Soviet Union system really doesn't allow for something fundamental in us as human beings. That's what they're dramatizing through Matthew Reese, Philip. What if Frank Langella was going through the same crisis, but we never knew that? And what if that was the nature? I started to think of the priest as a spiritual counselor. And what if that's why Frank Langella used to come to see him so much, and that's what he was trying to communicate to Philip when he says, Frank Langella used to really like to come to see me. And then it suddenly struck me, it could be a great moment if this priest actually read into Philip's soul, that he was giving information, but all the while he was sensing this deep unrest that Philip's been carrying for 3 seasons on this show, and wanted to assist him, wanted to offer him a perspective, even though he can't be so bold as to say, God is wanting to speak to you or something like that, but he can sense the inner turmoil of Philip. And so if he then could convey to him, drop all the pathetic, like me stuff, which doesn't have the ring of anything that interests me. What if it's like he's out of himself, he's performing the role that the writers gave me, that's what he does. What if he then conveys, he's trying to save Philip. What if he's trying to convey to him in a subliminal way, and the way we say you don't talk your subtext? This is a good example. But make the subtext interesting, make the subtext, I want to save Philip. And then let Philip take pause when he senses this person I'm just meeting is seeing something I don't think I'm showing anybody. And just by changing that subtext, I had a hook on how to direct it, the actors had a hook on how to act it, and also it helped the story in the next episode because it made it a more meaningful experience for Philip, which would justify why he would think, I want this man to be the one that marries us. So that was just a very exhilarating moment for me, and to the point where afterwards, because the writers were tired of me complaining about this scene. I was saying, guys, I'll shoot it, but I really don't understand this. And I called them up right afterwards and said, God, I'm so excited. Let me share with you what I got with it. And they were thrilled. And what was interesting, and this is then the mystery of the creative process, is I didn't change a word. It played just fine. It played just consistent with that new subtext. So in some mysterious, interesting way, some part of them, I believe, was working from that place. I don't think I would have seen it had it not, there's some reason they chose the words they chose instead of other words. Now, and I think that's and to their credit, these writers, they never say, oh yeah, sometimes I have the experience where writers say, yeah, I thought that all the time. But they were thrilled themselves, and it's just a great example to me of how we each can we bring our own perspective. If you have a fierce commitment to making something great and don't settle for something that you don't really believe and understand, sometimes amazing things can happen. I've talked a long time, and I was going to make this a collaboration, so it's time to make it a collaboration. Let's have some questions and see what you want to ask about or talk about. Yeah.
We spoke a little bit earlier, Dan, but it's the great mystery to me of directors on series is, and you've worked on such seminal series, I see The Wire, Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, amazing, important series. But each of those has a very distinctive style and look. They're very different from each other. And I don't understand how different directors can come on board and retain the house style so that it's consistent throughout the series.
That's a very understandable question, and it doesn't always happen that they do, and sometimes there's decisions made editorially to compensate for mistakes in that area. But a couple of things. First of all, the director is the one temporary person. Everything else is consistent. You have the same director of photography, you have the same production designer, you have all these you have the same actors, you have the same set of writers. So the director is the one person who's kind of coming in with a potentially new take on things, which I think is a good reason for there being different directors, because otherwise it can get, the paths are well worn. It's like the director can offer something new. But I take, and all that is to say that, there are other people watching that. Like when I'll come in and if I come up with a certain kind of shot that's not typically done on this show, the director of photography will maybe say that. Say, well, we'll do that if you want, but that's not something we normally do. Or we don't normally shoot don't normally go longer lens than 50 millimeter, or shorter lens than 50 millimeter. I mean, you asked for a 32 millimeter wide lens here. Just to let you know, we don't normally do that. This is more of a long lens show. And, some directors will say, I don't care, or some directors will say, I'm doing that for a particular reason, which is what I would say if I were doing it for a particular reason. Or I'll think, fine, I want to honor the show. But also, I regard it as the guest director's job, and I generally work as a guest director, sometimes I've been a producer, but I like to move around. I generally turn down that role because I don't like just working on one show. I like the chameleon-like nature of my work. I get to move around and experience different worlds, different sensibilities, but that's the task, is to fully immerse oneself in that world. It's like when you come onto a show, when I come onto a show, I feel an obligation to watch as many episodes as I can of it already, certainly to read all the scripts leading up to my episode in a season, watch whatever ones may already have been edited, find out maybe where the story is going so I can help reverse engineer some stuff that way. But I regard it in a couple ways. It's like every show has, I think the simplest way I like to put it is like, I like to learn the language of the show so I can speak it in my voice. Not mimic somebody else, bring myself to it. That's the only thing. That's key. And when you guys are writing anything, it's like, that's what I mean by finding something you care about. You know, it's like, that's what you have to offer is yourself. And that's all I have to offer, is how I would see this. But I don't want to just go off and, I mean, I need to be supported by the framework that exists. I have to exist within that framework. So I'll be watching things like cutting style. Is this a show that, likes to cut very quickly? So do I need a lot of angles for this to fit into the language of this show? Is it handheld? Is it the very take kind of thing, or are there stately classical kind of angles? 6 Feet Under, you mentioned, would have every episode there's a signature shot of 6 Feet Under, which they call a split diopter, which is holding in focus different things in different planes. So you have a strong foreground close-up of somebody, and then the other half of the frame in the background would also be in focus. That was like, you always would look for opportunities, hopefully to advance the story, but that's the language. So you have the responsibility to learn the language that way. And beyond that, I don't know really what more to add. I mean, it's like some people do it better than others. I really enjoy the challenge. I like going to completely different kind of shows precisely because I have to learn that language. I mean, sometimes I'll sense when I see a show, I'm fascinated by, I'm generally not interested in something I already know how to do. I've already done that. I like seeing something that feels foreign to me. It's like, because I'd like to learn how to see that way, or I'd like to learn the sensibility of that showrunner. Wow, that's really interesting. Because if I direct it, I have to get it. And I have to, stay with it until I do get it. And so it's a challenge to me that motivates me. Was there anything more, maybe specific I can answer about that? Yeah, okay, thanks.
I'm absolutely fascinated by a common thread, even among the 3 shows that you've discussed today. Whether it's Russian spies, or it's a serial killer, or it's an Italian gangster, those outrageous circumstances are juxtaposed over a very familiar situation, which is that of family, that we all understand and can relate to. So that resonated with something that you said earlier about how you find the universal motivation for, be it a character, be it you as a director directing actors, or be it you as an actor in the position of a character. So I'm curious whether this is one of the reasons perhaps that you are drawn to this material, because I'm here with a project exactly like that, which is juxtaposing outrageous situations with a very familiar one. So I'm curious if that's a through line that you find in your work.
Can you state for me what the through line is that you're seeing, what exactly that is?
Yes, absolutely. So in the case of the Americans, it's Russian spies, but it's an all-American family that we can understand. In the case of The Killing, at least the scene that we saw, it's a serial killer, but again, that discovery happens in the midst of a very familiar family scene. The Sopranos similarly. So I'm curious whether that collision between those very kind of like out there ideas, and none of us are Russian spies, with family is something that you find as a through line in your work.
You know what I think is the through line? Not so much family, but common humanity. It's like I'm really drawn to seeing myself in the other. For all of us to see, I mean, it's a very timely, important issue for our species, you know. So what every example you gave, it's like, you know, and it's also true in directing actors. You know, you can't direct very well an actor to be a bad guy. Every bad guy has his or her own worldview, a set of experiences that make it perfectly understandable and justified, you know, to them, how they're acting. And the best scenes, I think, are when, you know, the director and the actors are cognizant of that. So that's the most poignant, and that's also the most scary, because you think, I understand why this person wants to do whatever horrible thing. And they're probably not going to be stopped so easily, because it's a deep, unresolved emotional problem that I would be challenged not to feel the same way had those same things happen to me. So I'm always really interested in, you know, finding the truth of something, you know, and you know, it's easy to find the truth of things that we're comfortable with, like and used to. So family, we feel, okay, I know that. But, you know, so maybe that's the common thread. I'm always trying to look for understanding. I think that's one of the things that really fascinates me and motivates me. It's like to confront something I don't understand and try to understand it. And then you can, you know, so maybe that's the connection. Yeah, or Phil.
Working all those years on TV, how do you see it changing? In terms of, do you see it?
TV?
Yeah.
Well, you actually tell me that, because you're the ones who are going to change it. And I mean that. Well, as a director, I mean, the big change for me was The Sopranos, because, you know, I had worked in TV, you know, for several years before that, but network productions were a certain thing. And then The Sopranos came along through HBO, which changed the game for a couple of big reasons I identify anyway. One of which, the main is the economic model. The networks made their money by advertising dollars, which is dependent on the number of people watching the show. So their impulse is not to offend anybody. You know, they don't want to drive anybody away. They want to make it inclusive, which tends towards appealing to the lowest common denominator. Don't offend anybody, you know, which isn't a very creative approach. You also had with networks commercial breaks, which mandates a couple of things. Probably if there's, I don't know, if there's 4 commercials and you have 4 cliffhangers you need, because it's like, you know, after the commercial, are they going to come back after the commercial? You know, so it's like a whole different unrealistic way of telling stories. The Sopranos was, HBO had been in existence several years before it, but this was the first show they were fortunate enough to hire David Chase, who had something deep within him that he wanted to work through, and he saw an opportunity to do that. And HBO was fine just appealing to its subscriber base. It didn't have to not offend people, just so long as the right number of people wanted to pay to see the show, that's fine. So that changed that. It also changed the need to have a commercial break, so it became like a little feature. You didn't have to have artificial endings every 15, 8 minutes or 12 minutes. So when that happened, there was and shortly after that was 6 Feet Under, another great show. You know, forms have changed. Every time Breaking Bad came along, and we've never seen a show like that. And what's the one with Malik, the actor Malik, the computer?
Oh, Mr. Robot?
Yeah, Mr. Robot that had very bold, angles. Like, wow, whoever thought of putting a head on the bottom left of the screen and everything else is, it's like suddenly. So that, but to me, that kind of freedom has been around now for many, many years, and to the point that frankly, I sometimes get bored at people trying to create something new and glitzy just for the sake of it, which is a danger when you have so many things competing for viewership. But those are some of the some of the reasons I think things have changed. If that was your question, the reasons they've changed or how they've changed.
How you've seen it,
Yeah.
the narratives, different narratives.
Yeah. Well, it's like, and then now there's such an opportunity. I think there's over 500 series created last year. And it's like, you know, the worry is that, you know, the market, you know, the supply will exceed the demand, and suddenly, I've already had this experience on a couple of great shows I got to work on the last couple of years got canceled because, you know, nobody found them. And, you know, that's a worry. The head of FX came out a couple of years ago and said, we have a little problem. There are going to be some really good shows that are not going to make it because there's not enough people to go around. But that's, you know, as I've said to a couple of people, it's a better problem than to not have enough jobs. It's great right now. So you all have a lot of opportunity. If you have a good idea, everybody's looking for it. It's not just Netflix and Amazon. Now Apple's getting into the game. YouTube. I think my next job is going to be for YouTube Red, whatever that is. I don't even know. I mean, to me, it's irrelevant. I just like that I get to do the job, and where it airs is, you know, out of my hands. Anybody else? Yeah.
So you said it in the way that you work is you hopefully have a collaborative relationship with the proof. So when is it too collaborative?
Well, this is in directing. I love the job of directing because it's so. It's really interesting because you have to lead. You're coming in, especially as a guest director. Now I've been a producer on shows too, and then when I direct, people jump, you know, right away. Oh, that's a producer. But you know, when you come on as the guest director, you have to establish competence very quickly. You have to establish trust, primarily, you know, first and foremost from the cast, because you're going to be telling them how you think a moment should play, and they're looking at you like it's their face up there. It's like I don't even know you, and you know how you know. But that's also true of the crew. You want to, and to me, what I have, you know, I kind of knew going in, but I've had confirmed over and over, is you have to respect people. You have to treat them with respect. But most importantly to this question you raised about when is it too much, the collaboration, you cannot abdicate your role as final arbiter. You're still king for a week and a half. And, you know, you can't nice guy yourself out of getting what you want. You know, and there are going to be times, sometimes awkward times, where you're going to have to, but you know, you're not a dictator. So especially when you come into a show like if I'm doing Homeland, and Claire Danes really doesn't want to do, I mean, I know her well now, I've done a lot of them, so we have a different kind of relationship, but I'll tell an interesting story. There was a show that didn't last, it only went about one season, and it was dumped even before it was finished. The network soured on it. It was about 4 years ago. It was called Crossbones. It was a story of Blackbeard, and John Malkovich played Blackbeard. And it's funny, it's one of these career things. I was offered to either go to Toronto in the snow and direct Fargo before it aired, or go to Puerto Rico in the balmy weather and work with John Malkovich playing Blackbeard. And I'm thinking, Fargo, that was a movie. I mean, you know, this is going to be a derivative snow, and I'm going to choose Puerto Rico. So you know, of course, Noah Hawley, who offered me the job, you know, it's like something you reject somebody, and it's like it's going to be hard to get offered another job from that person. So I get to Puerto Rico, and Malkovich is one of the most forbidding actors that there is. He's like, you know, he's just he plays a lot of goofball parts in some comedies, but he's, you know, this was not a goofball part. He was very into the role. Very intimidating presence. He's one of these guys, he just looks at you like he's looking right to you. And the first day I had with him, and I'd already had an uncomfortable moment where I introduced myself, which you also try to do. That's another way if you don't want to show up on the set that you haven't even met the person. And I kind of told him what an amazing performance I had seen him do in the LA stage once, and he just looks at me like, and I felt like this slobbering, like sycophantic guy, and I walked away, and this guy hates me already. And And so we rehearsed the scene, and I loved the scene. In reading it, I know this is going to be a great scene. And we do the scene, and Malkovich plays it in a way I never had anticipated, and it sucks. It's just totally wrong. And first time with John Malkovich, and the scene, in short, is to get his flavor of what was. Blackbeard, the story is that he had this island of brigands, and they would just go out and maraud and stuff. And there was a British upper class guy who had come to the island, and he was the scientific genius, and Blackbeard needed him to fix something that was critical for a mission, and it was very hard to fix. And he comes to visit the guy, and he asks, "How's it coming?" And he says, "Well, it's really, really hard." And the dialogue is, Blackbeard says, "You know, when you first came here, I really thought you were basically a piece of shit. You know, you were aristocratic, and you were, you know, nose in the air, and came with a spoon in your mouth, warm, you know, and all that stuff." And you know, as years go by, you know, it's been interesting, and I really want you to know how. I forget all the dialogue, because I really want you to know how important this is to me that you do this, that you get this right. There was some other dialogue. And Malkovich played it straight ahead. He played it deferentially, and he played it genteelly, which is understandable in a certain way, because he was playing Blackbeard against type in a certain way, like, wow, he's an aristocratic guy and all that. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is not this scene. And so now what do I do? And so I girded myself up, and you have to think of a note that's actable, that he can receive, that's not over-talked. And I just went up to him and I said, "John, first I acknowledged how he played it. I see, you're playing it respectfully and all that. I'd like you to think about it a little differently." Just, "Oh." "Yeah, I'd like you, the contempt you describe having felt for him when he first got here, I'd like you to still feel it. So that it doesn't matter how long this guy's going to be here, he just as soon slit his throat than not. So that it becomes, again, subtext. He was playing the text. I don't have a problem with you now, I had a problem with you then. I'd like you to still have the problem. And you're conveying to him, I've never liked you, I still don't like you, and if you don't fix this fucking thing, you're going to be slit. Your throat will be slit." Which is what the scene needed, And, but I gave the note, it was very directable. It was just a simple thing. I want you to still feel that contempt. And he just said, "Very well." And he does the scene, and it's brilliant. The scene comes alive. And that's another thing, as directors, some of your directors, it's like, that's the thing. I know when I can move on, when I know I've watched a scene, it felt alive. It's funny, when you direct bad material, it's so great working on great shows, because generally making it come alive is not nearly so difficult as if you have a terrible script. If you have a terrible script, the image that came to me when I started out was, it's like Dr. Frankenstein, where you have this big slab on the table and you got all this electrical stuff trying to charge it to make it, doesn't live yet, no, more, it's like you have to devote so much effort to just, okay, it's at least alive. But he had made the scene come alive. And afterwards, he didn't say a word, we went home. I said, "Well, okay, dodged a bullet there, I'm glad I got the scene. We're going to work again, in the future. I hope he's okay with my having given him a note." Didn't say a word. About 3 days later, I'm taking my laundry into where the wardrobe people wash everything, and I'm throwing it in myself to do the wash myself and all that. And the wardrobe lady comes up to me and she says, "John really likes you." And I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Yeah, he said you're the first director who gave him a note." Which I thought was pretty interesting, so that you cannot abdicate. You cannot, I think that was what, I'm not sure if that was the question, but it's like, I know I can't. I'm gonna get an ulcer maybe by not doing it. And early in my career, that was, my stomach was much more tight in knots, because now at least I know myself well enough to know I'm not leaving the scene until we get what I want. But, so you cannot, you enlist collaboration, but you cannot abdicate your own sense as a director of what is true and what is good. And there's also times when you have to cut off collaboration because you're mindful of the clock. I know that's a good idea. Like a trick a lot of people use. And it's not even just a trick. It's like if you really have a dispute with an actor, you might say, okay, let's do it both ways. Do it this way, let's try it, this other way. There are times you don't have time for that, because if you do it both ways, you have to do it every angle both ways. You don't know which angle is going to be used, and the actor knows if you're bullshitting him if you just do it in the master, and then you get another close-up, and no, just do it the way, we got it, the master, they know. But there are times you don't have time for that kind of thing. You have to be willing to, hold that, and then you have to hope that you know who you are and how that the people respect that, because they know you're holding the vision of the show. Yeah.
Have you ever had a writer come up to you and say, you just shot that all wrong and not what I had in mind?
I don't remember that happening. And generally you won't get that far, because those kind of knockdown dragouts might happen before we start filming. I'll rehearse it. If the writer is on set, I'll rehearse it and get it to where I want it to be. And then I might turn to the writer. I said, are you okay with this? And if they have a problem with it, I might adjust. Because I like to not exclude, but I'm not going to do it if it's going to harm the project. It may be something I can change that doesn't affect anything that I care about. It might be something that they're fine with. And that may be something that's a different interpretation. I'm just going to say we're going to have to agree to disagree. I'm sorry. Because at the end of the day, there's only one director. There can only be one director on the set. Yeah?
The question that is really connected to that, how much do you intervene as a director? How much do you intervene into the story and work with writers?
That really depends on the show, but I deal with the writers a great deal. In terms of intervening, it's generally of necessity. It can't be a total overhaul. You just don't have time. It's like, you have to start filming, and not only that, the writers may not have time to make it, because the train has left the station and they've got to go back to the car behind yours and fix everything for that to get ready. So you really have to try to pick shows with good writers. That's number one. But you have to be clever. This is to me a really interesting part of it too. You have to be clever at finding something that you can hang your hat on, something about it that you can, some organizing principle that you can, whatever you have a problem with. I often will ask for changes, but they're often subtle changes, because it doesn't really necessarily, usually I can make something work, make the subtext a little different by changing, there could be a different cue that I know an actor is going to be able to go somewhere else if they give me that. So, that's generally the case. No more questions? Yeah.
Did you ever work on a series where you were the one making the pilot? And if yes, how much input do you as a director have in the vision that will then be probably the one that defines the entire series?
Yeah, I've only done 3 pilots, and I don't like the experience. Partly because generally, in my experiences on all 3 pilots, people are so anxious and kind of getting in your hair about what they want it to be, and then they can have more input because it's the network or it's. And there's also so much more that has to come together quickly. The pilots I've worked on, there have been cases where, you don't even know if it's going unless they can get a particular cast person, and then they may have to shoot in this city instead of that city, and you've already prepped there. So it's an unnerving thing. I have tremendous respect for really good pilot directors. I'm not drawn to that, and part of it is I think I realize what excites me is not so much this is my vision, I got to tell my story. I'm personally, this is not saying this is better or worse than anything. Personally, I almost approach my jobs as an actor approaches a part. I like the structure of something that exists that I can then, again, it's this idea of seeing something other and then making it mine. That's more of my own personal bias, I think. But it's true, if you direct pilots, you have a lot more possibility to set the visual style and a whole other range of things.
I was asking this because, for example, like shows like Dexter, you can see
shows like what?
Dexter. Yeah. You can see how it mutated with from the pilot to the end of the first season. It's like a huge change in every director who possibly had input until it finds its style. And
it used to be. I don't know. That historically has been the case that if you go back to shows that are kind of famous shows and look at the pilot, you almost don't recognize it.
Exactly.
Because it's like. Which is interesting too, because now there's a lot of shows that, pilots are a crazy system. It's like they spend so much money every year. They used to spend more on making pilots and only, I don't know what tiny percentage actually go to series. So you have 95% of the production just thrown in the waste can. And, you look at that and you think, this is crazy. And so a lot of people, many shows have started doing this, going straight to series, which a lot of writers love because they don't have to, they know, okay, good, you got a show already. But there's a big downside to that also, because you film the first episode, and it hasn't been edited, and then you start the second episode. And then the director's working on the director's cut of the first episode while the next director is directing the second episode. And you start the third episode, and the first episode still hasn't been edited really. And then you start the fourth episode, and the first episode has now gone to producers, and they're working on it, but they haven't shown it to the network. And you get to maybe the fifth episode, and you have a show to the network, and everybody says, wait a minute, this love interest between there's no chemistry between these two people. I know when we filmed 5 episodes already with them, with that bit of the story. And there could be, all kinds of things like that. So there's a great value also. I'm not saying I'm against shows going right to series, but you have to recognize it's dangerous. Because you, as writers, you kind of have to make decisions, and you're working on your whole storyline. You may find that, someone is, I did the first season of Lost, and Hurley, nobody thought he was a character anybody would care about, a big fat guy on the island. It's like, and people loved him. So it's like, you don't know who's going to capture, the audience. You told the story, Gloria, yesterday about the guy who was the breakout star. You weren't thinking of that. You already had his demise ready for season, I don't know if you delayed it to the end of season 2, but, you probably were committed to that story being told. And it might have changed your view had you known, wait a minute, you've got this amazing actor who's going to bring everybody in. You don't know that kind of stuff. I had an example that just slipped my mind. But, Homeland. And this is a cautionary tale in a way. Homeland started, and the idea in Homeland, I think if you were really telling the story faithfully to the story, Damian Lewis would have been dead by the end of season 1. And I think that's what the producers intended. This is a guy who wore a suicide vest into killing or at least early in season 2. And that may have been the original plan. I think that was the original plan. Early in season 2, he was going to be killed. But everybody loved Damian Lewis. So Showtime actually, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not 100% certain about this, but Showtime told the writers, you're not killing Damian Lewis off in season 2. So you got what many people think was the weakest season of Homeland, season 3, when there's this whole Baroque plot of, Damian Lewis somewhere in Iran and all this, and, which they had to jump through story hoops because they were keeping a character alive because he was popular. It's a little off subject to what you asked, but what the hell. I'm happy to answer any question you want, or we can go.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, why don't you start it? Yeah.
Have you, on the shows that you've worked on, have you done a bottle episode? And if so, is it different from a regular one?
Bottle episodes are funny. What is meant by a bottle episode is sometimes when shows go over budget, and it's always more expensive to take a shooting company out from a studio. You have to pay all the drivers and all the trucks, and you know, you go out to a location, and you might have to move within the day to another location, so you're losing all that. Say you have a 12-hour shooting day, you're losing all the time that's required to load the trucks. You know, you shoot a scene up to just before lunch, and then the crew has to wrap it to the trucks, and then they have to travel to another location, and so you've lost a couple hours there. So you can shoot generally less content in a day on a location day, and you're paying many thousands of dollars that you don't have to pay if everyone's still in the studio. So often when shows get behind and over budget, the studio will say, give us a bottle episode, which means it's all in the bottle, in the sound stages. We're never going to go out. It's all going to be on our permanent sets. We don't have much set construction. We can maybe afford to build a set or two, but we'll stay on the sound stages. We'll maximize our shooting and all that. And I have done them. The funny thing about them is they often don't save money. And I'm not sure why that is, but I think it's generally because of the story hoops that have to be jumped through to make it work. Sometimes there's more scenes than you have, you know, time to shoot, so you might wind up shooting more. You know, sometimes they can work very well, but it's, you know, I don't think it's a good goal to have as a reason for making an episode. Yeah, Dimitri.
Well, a question which is a little bit more general regarding the formation of a director and the formation of a scriptwriter. Sometimes people consider that in order for a scriptwriter to be formatted, educated, it is much easier to find a method and to make it rationally, while for film directors it is considered that it is more a matter of instinct or talent, or I don't know. What do you think?
If I understand, you mean that writing can be more formulaic, more something you learn, like one of these stories, like the Christian was talking about, we're going to follow these story beats, and presto, we have a script, and a director works more instinctively.
I don't say he or she does, the director.
Yeah.
I say that there is this, you know, some people believe that directors cannot, to formulate, to help a director to be a director, to study the discipline of, the material itself. It cannot be studied as easily as writing.
Yeah, there may be some truth. I might agree with that to some extent. I know I'm very, I was thinking of this watching, first of all, listening to your lecture, Christian, and realizing the rigor that you guys approach your storytelling in terms of, give me the beat, the scene by scene by scene. And I was thinking, boy, I'm really glad I don't have to do that. I'm glad I just get to instinctively tell the story. To me, the fundamental question as a director is, how does that make me feel? How do I feel about that? Which just goes to the instinct. So whether it's a performance, there's something about that I don't feel, but where there is coincidence is I'm also very aware of the audience. It's like, what is the audience feeling now at this moment? That's my entry into any moment or scene. Where am I left? Where is the audience at the beginning of this scene? And how do I want to manipulate their response? When do I want to, there's a climax here, I might want to misdirect, I don't mean badly direct, I want to point them to something that would lead to this moment being a surprise, or I might want to give them a little premonition, So I'm thinking of always what the audience is, where the audience is, but I have to be the audience when I'm directing also. Which means consulting my feelings. So it's kind of like, how do I feel by this? Oh, okay, and that's good because I want the audience to feel that, or I'm not feeling what I want the audience to feel. So what can I do? But I think it's, in my experience, I think that's true. I'm not, but I also am aware of storytelling needs, because I've done it a lot, and I'm aware, I think instinctively, of a lot of these beats that have been broken down, as I think writers can be also without being formulaic. It's like, it's on page 15, and so-and-so said I have to have this happen there. That's a pretty dry approach, lifeless. But having told a lot of stories and edited a lot of shows and knowing it, I think it's just part of the way I see is I kind of have a structure in mind that I don't have to, that I can call on. But it's an interesting thing, and it goes to one of the things I first started saying, is a director has to work with reality. It's not just a theory. It's not just an idea. The director has to deal with the facts on the ground, and it's like, so you have to improvise. And sometimes, it's if something is working a different way than you imagined it, you have to decide, well, does this work for the story as a whole? It might affect this other beat down the line. Can I make that beat work a little differently? Which is kind of screwing with the structure a little bit, but you've got to deal with what is given, what is here. That's a really interesting question. Don't know quite anything more to really say about it. Yeah, let's go.
In The Wire, you have professional actors and non-professional actors. How do you deal when they are different in the scene? How do you integrate the people?
Yeah, I love dealing with actors. It's probably my favorite thing, and it's partly because I spent 3 years being an actor, and I have tremendous empathy for what they have to do and appreciation for what they are bringing. It's like, it's interesting, we go to the cinema to kind of see it, people flatter themselves, it's my writing, it's my directing, it's like, much more so than anybody else, they're going to see the actor enact something that they can identify with or learn something from. And actors are being, maybe the most important thing I learned from trying to act was, and you get in production, and there are people in production who say, actors are just a pain in the ass, and all this and that. Yeah, we're asking them to feel things we don't want to feel. It's like, imagine the worst possible circumstance. That's in this, script. Imagine you've lost X, Y, or Z. Now, how would you be? It's like, that's why I recognized my deficiencies. It's like I couldn't just on a dime go there. I'm a much better actor directing actors, because it's funny. I'm much more willing to go there as a kind of energetic transfer to them, to embody something for them to see, because I can step away in a minute and see what they do. But so I also have a belief that I like to think that I will get a performance from anybody because of the way I work. I try to keep it I try to create the correct imaginary circumstances, not give them the result term, not to say be really sad here, but create a set of imaginary circumstances that would produce in me, again, it's consulting how you would feel, how would, and give them, this is what's happened, and you've just come from here, and you give them an intention, give them and I find that if you can get characters to relate their own experience somehow, they will stop acting, or they'll stop inexperienced actors, often think I'm not that person, I'll just say this line. No, you gotta I had a funny experience way long ago on Beverly Hills 90210. Any of you watched that one? That was when I first started directing a lot. I did about 20 episodes of the first 3 seasons of the original show, not the remake. And there was one summer, there was a storyline where Shannon Doherty, Brenda, goes to Paris. And she pretends she meets some good-looking guy who's American in a park, and he thinks she's French. And he starts stumbling trying to talk to her, and she decides to pretend she's French. And so they have this kind of relationship, which she kind of likes. And then at her dorm one day, this guy shows up with his friends at this American dorm, and she's, oh my God, he's here, he's gonna know that I'm, The guy was Dean Cain, who wound up playing Superman later. I don't know if you know him. He's an actor. He doesn't do much anymore, but and he was very new as an actor, and he had just gotten out of college, and he came into this scene, to this fraternity, at this hostel or whatever it was, and he was terrible. He was just, he was clearly hating himself. I mean, he was feeling really self-conscious, and he was supposed to be this really charismatic, good-looking, like Dean Cain is, guy. And it's like, you would think this is why, Brenda is attracted to him, and he's this great guy. He says, Brenda, what are you doing here? Come listen, it's like, and he just was horrible. And he was so defeated. He just was like, he knew he was terrible. And the cast, they were young too, and they were brutal. The regulars laugh at him. It was just making it was my nightmare as an actor. It's like I said, because I knew if I was in that place and you feel people hate you, how are you going to start liking yourself, right? So I'm thinking, this guy doesn't have training, what can I do? But I knew he had been a football player. And when he was at some Ivy League school, he had actually been drafted by the NFL. And I had talked to him about this, and and he was, that's pretty good to get drafted by the NFL. So again, on the set, I said, Dean, here's what I'd like you to imagine. Now I thought of something that wasn't accurate in the script, but it wasn't counter what was happening. So I said, I want you to imagine it's draft night, and you've just been drafted by the NFL. So suddenly he can, I know what that's like. Yeah, and suddenly, right away, he liked himself a lot more. So, I got drafted by the fucking NFL. Yeah, that's like, So I started working with him on that, and that broke through. It short-circuited the negative imagery he was having in his mind. Suddenly, he found something he could truly like about himself. And so you look for things like that. You try to find circumstances that even someone inexperienced will It's an art. It's a really interesting, fascinating psychological challenge. Every actor is different. And, some you can just appeal to the story and you can deal with, but even the best actors need help. It's because they might not have defined the story correctly. Because, you're working at breakneck speed and there's a million ways to play something, but there's really only one accurate way for the moment. And that's what, as a director, you've got to hold that vision and not let something slide because, it's Carrie, she's playing it like, I've seen her play that before, that's right for the part. Well, it may not be right for that moment. And you've got to then really narrow it down. Last call. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much.